Everybody get settled in here. Okay, good morning. Welcome to our new quarter. We're going to be studying the book of Nehemiah. We did send out some materials. Hopefully you had some time to look at it. We will be reviewing some of those questions that David had in there. I did not seek out a gentleman to lead prayer for us, but I'm just going to go for it. Grant, would you direct our thoughts, please?
Father in heaven, we're thankful to be in your presence as always together. We thank you for your kindness and your mercy. We recognize that you are a great king. We thank you for your leadership. We thank you for your mercy. We thank you for your son Jesus. We thank you for the plan that you put together to save us from our own sin from the beginning and before. And we thank you as we open the book of Nehemiah. We thank you for your people that you have kept all these years to make your plan come to fruition. We pray that you would help us to understand and learn what you have for us in the book of Nehemiah, what we should learn from him. We pray that you would help us to become the people you want us to be because of it. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. I'm going to be spending a few minutes this morning just on some introductory thoughts, things I want to share with you. David sent me some of his introductory material, and I'm kind of using that as a foundation. So once again, if you had an opportunity to print that off, that would be fantastic. As I get into our introductory thoughts this morning, I would like you to be meditating or churning on the idea of leadership. Just kind of work it through a little bit and be asking yourselves questions like, what is a leader? How would I define a leader? What does a leader look like? Because after we get through the introduction portion of this, I'm going to be putting out some questions for us. And I want you to kind of be ready as we get our minds going that direction. Kicking off this study, I wanted to look up some quotes on leadership. There is no end to the number of quotes on leadership. And I don't mean just in a spiritual nature. There's so many great examples, but I chose these two because I thought they were somewhat befitting our study. First one is from J. Oswald Sanders in his book, Spiritual Leadership. And he says, true greatness, true leadership is found in giving yourself in service to others, not in coaxing or inducing others to serve you. True service is never without cost. Often it comes with a bitter cup of challenges and a painful baptism of suffering. And I thought that was kind of befitting. In fact, I almost think that might be somewhat of a good definition of what leadership is. The ability to take on something, the ability to lead others without coaxing them or persuading them or bribing them in other way than them just following you. And true leadership has to embrace struggles. And I like his wording there, the painful baptism of suffering. Another one that I thought was a little bit more simple, from D.E. Host. He says, it occurs to me that perhaps the best test of whether one is qualified to lead is to find out whether anyone is following. And I think, again, that's another one that will be very befitting our study in Nehemiah. And a question you might ask yourself as a leader or your aspirations to be a leader is, who is following me and why are they following me? Because we're going to see a group of individuals follow Nehemiah, and we're going to answer the question of why they are following him as we look into this, what I see as one of the great leaders in our Bible. You know, there's so many spiritual leaders, right, in the Bible. We got Moses, we got Abraham, we've got David, we got Paul, we got Peter, we have Esther. These are all individuals I know when we've studied any one of those individuals, we've pulled out aspects of leadership. What about Nehemiah? What is it about Nehemiah? I mean, if you put his name on the list, he kind of lands in the middle somewhere. He's not the top guy. What is it about Nehemiah that we would think we would look to Nehemiah for leadership? Here's a question I ask myself. What did he do that was so great? Did Nehemiah do anything that was really great? Let me share something with you here. He built a wall in 52 days. I want you to think about that for a moment, all right? Now, some of you know my secular job is I teach project management. I wish I could use Nehemiah as an example in my secular classes. Unfortunately, I can't. But when I think of projects, when I think of somebody looking at a situation, getting things done, weighing the pros and cons, the risk management and all those types of things, I think of Nehemiah. Who does that? Who builds a wall in 52 days? So we look at that and say, that's why he's so great. No. It's not what Nehemiah did. In fact, it doesn't matter what the size of the project is. It doesn't matter what the size of the task is that God may have set before us. It's how we do it. That's the key. And that's what we want to look at as we get into the study of Nehemiah. How did he do it? I am really excited about this study. A while back, David and I were talking, what do we want to cover in this quarter? And David mentioned Nehemiah, and I was like, yes. So, along with myself, David Bird, David Posey, and Grant Mulligan, we are going to take you on a journey through Nehemiah. And I'm really excited to work with these gentlemen and take you through this study. Now, we talk about leadership. Let's just pause for a moment. When you think about leadership in the church, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Anyone? Or what group of people come to your mind first? The elders, the deacons, the men, right? How many of you gentlemen, how many of us, you don't have to raise your hand, have been in a leadership class? All right, a men's training class. And I think they definitely are important. They have their purpose. Why is that? Because God has roles for men in the Lord's service. All right? But we don't want to take a subject of leadership and just say, this is a men's training. Leadership is for everyone. And that's really what we want to look at as we journey through Nehemiah. Not make this a men's training class, but make this a class about leadership. Because guess what? Everyone's a leader. Every one of us are a leader. Men, women, children, grandparents. Sometime in your life, you're going to have the opportunity, you're going to be an influence on someone else. Take kids for a moment. Have anybody ever seen kids lead? If you haven't, come to VBS. Come to VBS and just watch how some of the older kids lead the younger kids. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, that's kind of how it's set up. We bring the older ones in, maybe the junior high and high school, I might have that wrong, and they just kind of get things going. They take the younger ones around to the various stations or whatever the theme might be. If you want another great picture of leadership among young people, spend a week at FC camp. I often say, all we got to do is get the ball rolling. Right, Angie? Sometimes we just got to get the ball rolling and watch these kids, many of them kind of lead in their groups, in their cabins. Right? And so everyone's a leader. Everyone has an opportunity to lead because everyone has an influence on someone. Jesus told his disciples over in Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 and 17, he says, we're the salt of the earth, we're the light of the world. What he's saying is that we are going to influence, or if we are going to lead somebody to Christ, if we're going to influence them, we have to have leadership skills. We have to be able to look at the situation, understand the individual, find out where they're coming from, find out how powerful my example is, and hopefully leading them to Christ. Because what do they have to see? They have to see the character of Christ in us. It's not something we can just pass off to someone else. Oh, I'm not a leader. I hear that. I'm not a leader. Yes, you are. Let me ask this question. This is for all of you. Would you say we have a leadership crisis in our world today? Yes or no? Softball question. Yes or no? Yeah, and I don't want us to don't go into let's not get into a side of political or anything, but we have a crisis. We have a leadership. Probably didn't take you more than 30 seconds for your mind to go somewhere, all right? Why is that? What are your thoughts? Why is it that we have a leadership crisis across the board? Anyone? Yes?
People are in it for their own gain instead of people are in it for their own gain rather than trying to help others along.
That's right. And that's a thought I want to come back to here in a few moments. They're in it for their own personal gain. Did I see a hand over here?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Leadership takes sacrifice, and when you're looking out for yourself, it's hard to lead.
Right. Right. That's right. Very, very, very selfish motive. What are some other reasons why you think yes, Aaron?
I think a lot of times good leaders can get beat up a lot, and so it makes it unappealing to try to, take the heat constantly all the time. It's not very attractive.
Okay. There's definitely some discouraging things, Mike.
There is no training for good leadership.
Okay. Training. I'm going to Adam, and I'll come back to Ed. Adam?
People aren't relying on God.
Say that again.
People aren't relying on God.
People aren't relying on God. Yes? Ed?
It's obviously a complicated topic. And having written on this since graduate school many times, there's lots of things that play into that. But part of being a leader is going someplace and having people who want to go to the same place. And when you have a culture where everybody thinks they are the leader, the contentiousness that is born in our democratic processes and our current culture. Part of the problem in not having people who qualify to be leaders is the different voices and the fact that our system encourages people to be in positions of rule who follow rather than lead. If you are a leader, you've got to go someplace. And maybe you're going to go there by yourself. Maybe other people are going to go with you. There are always leaders, and there are leaders today. If you say we have a leadership crisis because we don't have leaders, that's just not true. The problem is, are they going someplace? And so our problem, I think, as a culture is we don't know where we're going.
Right.
And that's the problem.
Right. And I think it comes back down to some of the comments over here. I'm going to come back to Adam's comment too. Comes back to the fan that what's our foundation to follow? What's our standard that we can say this is how I can lead? Right. This is a I don't want to say a step-by-step method, but is there an example that you and I have? When we get done with Nehemiah, and I know for many of us this will be a review, but it'll be an exciting review. But when we get done with Nehemiah, you're really going to be able to see and take a lot of these things that Nehemiah used, and you can put them anywhere in your life. It's not just spiritually, and I know that's the most important thing. But be able to look, to go back to work, go into your homes, all right? If you're a coach, anything like that, and look to Nehemiah and say, how did Nehemiah lead? How did he get people to follow him? What is it that he did, and how can I incorporate that into my life? So the question is kind of an obvious question, but why look at Nehemiah? And why not Moses? Right? Why not David? Right? And as I said a moment ago, those are important studies, great leadership skills. But here's the thing about Nehemiah, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that I think kind of separates Nehemiah from the rest of the group. Nehemiah was a layman. He didn't, we'll get into chapter 1 on Wednesday. He didn't ask God for a miracle and say, please build the wall. Can you forcefully stop my enemies? We really don't have it. What we have in Nehemiah is kind of God's providence. We have him communicating with God. One of the phrases that pop up in the book, in the study, is, God put this in my heart. You're going to read that. Yes, Wes.
The other difference is, I think, with those other individuals is God called those people. He called Moses. David was anointed. He chose those individuals. We don't see that process with Nehemiah. Nehemiah sees a problem, and he takes it upon himself to solve it without God saying, you're the one who's going to do this.
I think that's exactly right. And I think that's why we can relate to him. He wasn't a prophet. He wasn't a priest. He wasn't a king. I think that's why we can relate to Nehemiah. Just briefly, and again, on Wednesday night when I get us into chapter 1, we'll go into great detail. But just briefly, here's a man who is a cupbearer for the king. We'll talk about that on Wednesday. All right? And he gets news about Jerusalem. What's going on? It's not good. The people are distraught. The wall's broken down. And right then, we see Nehemiah's compassion and concern as he goes right into prayer about this situation. I mean, what's the significance in those days of a city not having a wall? Is that a big deal? Have a wall? I mean, Folsom doesn't have a wall. Luke?
Well, I just want to set a little context. It was very important because that's how they defended themselves. And I think if you research this a little bit, some people will say the wall was more of a religious boundary, but it really was a defense mechanism to protect themselves. And the wall that he had to rebuild, depending on if you do some research, it might have been 1 mile or 2 miles long.
Oh, yeah.
And we're talking, I mean, I work in engineering. We're talking about, like, if you do the quick math, 66 million pounds of stone and mortar that he's having to do. So this is a big project, and that's a lot of the problem today is just there are big things that need to be done and lots of excuses. And he didn't take the excuse and say, this is too big for me, I can't do it. He traveled the distance and he did the work.
Right. Exactly. Well put. And thanks for the numbers there. Appreciate it. But really, it kind of gives you perspective, doesn't it? You look at Nehemiah, all right, and again, coming back there to the picture is he sees what needs to be done. And Wes, I think you put it really well. He saw what needed to be done, all right, and I don't want to get ahead of myself into chapter 1. And some character traits of Nehemiah that jump out at me, and I'm sure all of the teachers here will bring those out, is one of the first things he does is he recognizes his own weaknesses. He recognizes his dependence upon God. He carefully looks at the situation, all right? He analyzes, he looks what needs to be done. He knows there's going to be opposition. We got a couple guys we're going to come across here in Nehemiah, here right in chapter 2, are just going to stir the pot against him. If a fox jumped on your wall, it would fall down. They're just going to jeer at him, and he's like, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get this done. He strategically organized people to get this done. Now, you'll notice here I have concern, courage, and conviction. David had this on his handout, and I did not ask David what he meant by this. I just looked at it, and I'm going to tell you what I draw from this, and David could tell me afterwards if I missed anything. The first thing that we see with Nehemiah is his concern. If you look at chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, all right? When he heard the news, he had a deep concern. And in that concern, we see Nehemiah's compassion. We see his humility. We see his sorrow. A great leader has to have that compassion, has to have genuine concern for the situation set before them and its impact on the individuals. Second one is courage. It took a lot of courage for Nehemiah to do what he had to do, let alone go to the king, which again we'll get to, but let me just go there. Let alone go. I got to get past the king without getting my head lopped off so I can get this done. I know there's going to be opposition. I know that I'm going to have to be a leader and impact these tribes, these individuals to get this done. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities for discouragement. And opposition will quickly discourage if a leader can't oppose the opposition. So it's going to take Nehemiah a lot of courage. And the last one, maybe the most important one, is asking yourself, what was Nehemiah's conviction? And by that, I looked at that as simply, he believed in what he was doing, but number one, above that, he believed in God. And he was going to glorify God. Everything that he does was going to bring to God's glory. So he had the conviction and the understanding of what he needed to get done. I don't think Nehemiah shows us the kind of impact one person can have on a nation. One person. Now, how about a community? How about a local body of believers? How about a home? We never want to underestimate the impact you and I can have through our leadership skills. And he just served in a secular office. It's really what he did. Reminding ourselves he was nobody great. Yes, his job was important, but he was nobody great. Sometimes, I think, and this gets back to, I think Dale's comment a moment ago, but sometimes folks get lost in searching for their purpose. Ever talk to some of your believing friends? You know, what's God's purpose for me in this life? And I see some dangers in that, because I think sometimes for individuals, they look at Nehemiah, they look at Moses, and they look at these great leaders and the impact, and there's something ugly that creeps in. And what that is, maybe I'll be remembered for it. What differences am I going to make? And so when you do my funeral, look what the difference Scott made. Look what Scott did here. And that's a grave mistake. It's not about the magnitude of the project or trying to limit God. What's my purpose? Why not just be a Nehemiah? Why not just be a Paul or a Peter? Why not just look at a servant of God in the Bible and say, how can I mirror that? What can I learn from this individual? I guarantee you, Nehemiah didn't go, well, before I pray to God, I'm going to go down in the history books with this one. It didn't even enter his mind. He was ready to serve God. Ed?
Yeah, everything you said, I think, is important and true and valuable. One of the things that we know that Nehemiah doesn't talk about, we already know before we read Ezra and Nehemiah, that God promised in his prophets that he would bring them back from exile and they would have a city, that he would build the walls and extend the walls, that city would then have a certain mission that it would have, and that the Messiah would come into that context. And so, even though Nehemiah, the book, doesn't talk about this a lot, we know that without him knowing what his purpose was, that God was fulfilling prophecy in him, that is in fact what he did. And I think there's a big story there about how that when we just do our job, like you correctly said, and we use the benefits God's given us, and put him in a position, we use that position, God is able to do things with that God promised, even though we're not thinking. He didn't open up by saying, oh, by the way, God, you promised, so therefore we've got to go back and build this wall. Right. That doesn't get written. And that's like Esther. This is one of those great books that has things being accomplished that don't necessarily connect the dots for us, but we need to do that.
Right. Yes. Exactly. It kind of gets back to the idea of having a purpose. Well, God revealed to me. God has revealed to us. I don't know the impact. Each one of us are going to have an impact with our leadership. We know that. What that's going to be, I don't know. Only God knows. The question, and again, as we get into the study, is how are we going to lead? And how does it apply to each one of us? All right, good. We're good on time. I want to get into the discussion questions. I hope you had time to look at them. If not, that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and bring them up. But let's give leadership a definition. I think I'm looking to some good responses here, because we've got a lot of individuals in this room who have leadership roles in your jobs, managers, CEOs, things of that nature. So let's get some discussion going here. How would you describe leadership in your own words? Maybe a phrase. Yes?
Lead by being a servant.
Lead by servants, by being a servant. All right, what else? Yes? Look.
You can always see them in an organization because they're the people that have people rise up around them. We always say our A players are the ones that bring up everybody around them and touches them. In an organization, there'll be several different departments you'll touch, and every time you come into contact with these people, they're bringing up the people around them to get something done within the organization. So it's a lot like that second quote we put up there. You know, the leaders bring everybody up around.
All right, excellent. What else? Yes, correct.
I'd say someone who has vision and is able to have it be a vision that others are compelled to follow, but also knows how to effectively share that vision, whether that is in being a servant and helping and showing how it goes, or you just being able to describe it, do that like blind Lego test, where someone has the instructions and is trying to tell people how to build the thing without showing. That kind of idea of being able to have the vision and share how the vision is going to work. Perfect. Yeah.
Create and act in such a way that people follow you, all right? So we get this idea of what, how do we define this, all right? And again, when you give it some thought, we can really do a deep dive. But let's go into let's kind of take us into the next question here, all right? This will take it a little farther. What are some of the qualities? You should have a laundry list here. What are some of the qualities of great leaders? What are some things you look for? Terry.
I think they're moved to do the work. An example of that was Nehemiah. He was moved when he heard that God's beloved city, that the walls were broken down, and he did something about it. And also to your point, that he didn't look at himself first, like how will I be great if I do whatever. He didn't look at that. The only thing I can remember that Nehemiah asked God for was towards the end. He said, God, please remember me for good.
Yeah, right.
That's all he did. And he did the work.
All right. Angie.
Somebody who is loving. I don't think you can be a good leader unless you love the person, the project, the plan, whatever it is, the why. Somebody who is a good listener. You cannot be a good leader if you are not a good listener. Somebody who is a good learner, willing to learn. So you listen to the people who are reporting to you or following you, and you listen to the people who you report to and who you are following and are willing to learn.
Sorry. Yes, I'm going to come back. Yes, Jack.
Someone who's humble and willing.
Yeah. I just want to notice that we're focused on good right here. You have lots of leaders, and you could say the leader of, the lion pack is the lion that's in charge. And most of the books that get written on leadership in our culture have to do with this predatory, all the skills that predators use to get other people to follow them, the carrot and the stick and all that kind of thing. And what we've talked about correctly is being a leader among God's people is different. There are some qualities that might kind of move over into that. But good is the key thing, and there's none good but God. So the key thing in terms of leadership is to go to God. In Matthew 23:10, Jesus said, you'll have no leaders. One is your leader, who's Christ. That's a huge, huge reality. Right. And of course, we've got to then follow in a way that has these qualities that I talked about. But I think we've got to first say this is not worldly leadership. This is a different deal.
Right. Along with that, I want to come back to something that Angie said. And if you can permit me to use my regular job for a moment. I made a lot of connections. So what I'm teaching project management. Anybody want to guess what the number one issue is to not getting a project done? Well, actually, there's two. Okay, go ahead, Forrest. Pardon?
Time management.
Okay, it's time management, it's communication. It's communication, but it kind of comes back, Angie, to what you were saying, all right? You know what people are looking for? They're looking for a leader who is among them. I don't know another way to put that. They're looking for a leader who will say, who has the vision, who brings the team on board with the vision, shares, illustrates, is an example, looks to the team and say, what would you do? What do I do here? And the reason why I'm bringing that up is there's a biblical principle that just kind of rings through that. And I'm like, wow. What we're saying here is the very thing that we're looking at. Even in the world, yes, there are awful world leaders. And like I said, like Ed pointed out, they lead by carrots and sticks. If you do this, you'll get this. If you don't, we're going to punish you. All right, that's leading by guilt or fear is what that is. We want to lead like Nehemiah leads. I got some hands popping up. Yes, Roy.
I think that kind of what you're talking about is the ability to see people's talent and maximize what they're able to do.
Right.
And seeing, like this is their passion, this is what they're into, and help direct people into the right place.
Right, exactly.
Aaron?
Yeah, stakeholder engagement.
Yes.
So it's recognizing that other people also have a vested interest in something. It's not just you that has a vested interest in it.
Right.
And recognizing that because of that, everybody has to get on board to accomplish something.
And that's one of the characteristics of Nehemiah. When Nehemiah saw what needed to be done, okay, the people followed him, saw that too. I saw some hands popping up here. Randy and then Angie.
Kind of what's been said, that a good leader in every circumstance is one who's on site.
Yes. That's right.
On site, literally. Yes.
I think it's probably important to realize that we're talking about a leader. We're not talking about a director or a manager or somebody who's been thrown into a position by accident. A leader, in its very sense of the word, has to have somebody following them. You're not a leader if nobody's following you. And so you can become a manager in your secular world, and that's your job, but you're not a leader until you have people who are willing and able to follow you. So there's a difference in, like what Ed was saying. Yeah, there's bad directors, there's bad, managers, but they're not leaders because nobody's following them.
That's right.
And under those individuals, there might be some good leaders. I got Jim.
So I think that, and I'm feeding off a little bit about what Ed said, I think many of our comments could have to do with leaders in general out in the world. But if we're going to be effective leaders for Christ, then we have to embrace the values that He has called us to. And the teachers of the law said that upon two commandments hung all the law and the prophets. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul.
Right.
Love your neighbor as yourself. And if we begin with those two premises, then we will lead in the way that God wants. We'll be transformed by the renewing of our minds. And just think about just Tabitha. Tabitha's name has been memorialized for 2,000 years for the simple things that she did that grew out of her love for God and for her fellow man.
Right. And that's the foundation. And that's what we want to focus on. I got one more comment. Ben, did your hand go up, Ben?
I like a couple of the comments that were made, like with Angie, to build on that. A good leader ends up making decisions based on the entity that is leading, not how it affects me personally. Right? When you rise above this decision, how it affects me personally, to man, whatever I'm deciding affects the entity that we're in charge of, that's when you're looking more from that leadership perspective, which is very biblical. Think about that.
It is.
You can't focus decisions. You got to make it from the good of the entity.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that's that's kind of the point I was making is I see that in my life. I see that in my career. I see these spiritual connections. I'm not saying that they're got Christ on their heart and they're doing this for this reason, but I see some of those characteristic traits. Let's look at 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12. Let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity. Of course, Paul talking to young Timothy there, all right? That's another discussion when you're young, being a leader, but we wanted to stress the fact, as I did at the beginning of the class, that we are all leaders, we are all have an influence. But the question is let's look at some of the specific examples, all right, in speech, all right? What are some examples in speech? When you think about speech, maybe think about Nehemiah. Think about how he spoke to the people. Think about how Nehemiah interacted with the opposition. All right? What did he have in mind? What did he have his heart set on? All right? The other side is how can speech destroy your ability to lead? Let's flip the coin here. Terry?
Still on the other side of the coin, we're just back to it, but it's just that ability to motivate people. I think that's an important quality as well. So Timothy had to sound confident. If you're not confident, you're not going to be able to have any influence. Being able to motivate people, like Moses had to leave Egypt. I mean, he had to get out.
Right.
He came back and was able to lead. So that has to be developed on how you can lead. Nehemiah, he was able to do that, to fight for your wives and your sons and your daughters.
Right.
He motivated people. He didn't have to leave town. He was able to tell them this is what you need to do and strike at their heart.
Right.
And then another time he was asked to come down and meet with the other dignitaries.
Yeah.
And he said, no, I'm not coming down. So he was confident.
Right.
Yeah, excellent. Angie?
The first two, speech and conduct, are directly related to your integrity. And so, if you don't have integrity and you're on the other side of the coin now, if you speak untrue things, if you act in a way that's not toward the people or good for them, they're going to see that, and your integrity fails, and it takes maybe forever to get that back.
Exactly right. And I think
Integrity is a good summary of that. It just takes a moment to lose that. Just takes a brief second to be in that leadership role and ask somebody to do something that's unethical, to do anything. It doesn't anything in that line. I was reminded of an acquaintance of mine. All right, I'm just kind of putting this speech and conduct together here. This guy it was his ability to speak and to motivate was amazing. You're just like, wow. But he had a major fail point. He could walk in and convince us to build something great. Oh, we can't wait. But it would stop there. There was no plan. There was nothing behind it. And the point that I'm making is, yes, being a good orator is important, all right? But that's not the sign of, that's not a key point in being a great leader. So I'll hand over here, then come back to you. Yes?
Jamie, sorry.
So you mentioned before about being on site, and I think that's important, is being in the trenches with your workers, being a hard worker, I think is really important, and it boosts morale amongst people, because when somebody's not on site, it's kind of like they're giving me direction, yet they're not here knowing what's going on, what I'm dealing with. So.
Right.
Yeah, the idea of being on site, I really like that, what Randy said there, to be involved with it. Ed, and then we'll come back to it.
Just notice the text has to do with being an example. And an example is one who's following a pattern. And so it's not just that you be careful about speech and conduct and love and faith and purity in kind of general terms, and then you use these as places where you manipulate other people, because a lot of people do that. But we're supposed to be doing these things as people who are imitating Christ.
Right.
And so we are to be an example of Christ in doing these things, or in Nehemiah's case, an example of Yahweh, the Lord. That's a very different game. All kinds of worldly leaders focus on all these different things in order to have people follow them. But we're in the business of following Christ and then helping other people follow Christ. And that's what makes the difference.
Right. And I think that's where Nehemiah, that's where his conviction is. I think that's where that's at. So, Troy.
Yeah, like Ed, I like the word example because a leader drives the culture. Right. And if you want a good culture, you have to show, love, be positive in speech. But if you come across as harsh or critical or all those things, you're going to drive dissent, and then you're going to have that toxic culture.
Right.
Right. Oh, we got 5 minutes. I thought this was a good question. Which of these two methods do you think is the best method of leadership? Leadership by crisis or leadership by objective? What do we mean by leadership by crisis? Let's give a quick definition here. Leadership by crisis. Wes?
Firefighting, there's a problem, let's go solve it.
Right. Right.
What else? Something that disrupts the organization, kind of shakes things a little bit. Randy?
I'm going to say both are equally important because the leader's going to have to deal with both of those.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I can't put one above the other because they're both going to happen. Right? I mean, let's just put this on a keep this on a spiritual level here. Take an eldership, all right? They lead by objective, right? There is a biblical objective that our elders are going to look at and follow. And in the course of that leadership, guess what's going to happen? There's going to be crisis. Because as Bill Mosley always reminded me, and I know I've said this, I'm going to say it again for those who haven't heard, when I was young and I was going to be that preacher, he says, Scott, don't forget the church is made up of people. And what he meant by that is people with issues, and we use words like baggage and problems, and things are going to rise up, and you're going to have to adjust quickly to some of those things. So that's right. I think that's it's not I don't see it as a one or the other. All right. A leader, somebody who is influencing, is going to be prepared to some degree for these crises. Randy.
A preference to lead by objective, the state of the eldership, that's always the preference, but the reality is that crises happen.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's right. Aaron?
Yeah, to build on that, I think you have to have leadership by objective, otherwise you won't know how to lead in a crisis. If you're only ever in crisis mode and just taking it just crisis by crisis and not forward thinking or vision, we talked about vision earlier, if you don't have the vision of where you're wanting to go, then that's going to impact how you manage a crisis.
Right. If you think about
Nehemiah just for a moment. All right, we know what the objective is. Now, we're going to get into that. We could say the objective is to build the wall. Yes, it's to glorify God. But let's just put it as the wall. The objective is we want to get Jerusalem secure again. We want to lead. It wasn't just that. It was leading the people back to God, get them refocused, all right, as we get to the latter part of the book, all right? But in that journey to building the wall, we're going to see crisis. We're going to see situations that rise up that Nehemiah is going to have to handle on the spot. And you're going to be amazed again at what he does to keep the focus, keep the people going in the right direction as they deal with these unplanned events, we call them. We got about 2 minutes. One more question, a good one to end with. Whoops. If you had to name one thing that is most important to be an effective leader, what would it be? We've had enough discussion. Throw some words out there. There was one thing. If you had to name one thing, you can't name two. One. Ben?
One. You get one.
Humility.
Humility. Luke?
Honesty.
Say that again?
Honesty.
All right, what else?
Good listener.
Good listener, yes. Randy, and back to Jack.
Be on site.
Being on site, that's right, yes.
Willingness.
Willingness?
Love.
Love? Yes, Garrett.
Have a plan.
Have a plan. That's right. Any, are we missing any? Pretty good list there, huh? That's right, yes. Kristen, yes.
Show that you know how to solve a problem.
Say that again.
Show how you know how to solve a problem.
Show how you know to solve the problem. That's right.
Because if we go in as a leader or as an influence and we don't know where we're going, that's a very good point. All right, next week, or Wednesday night, excuse me, if you would spend, I know we've been reading Nehemiah, if you would focus on chapters 1 and 2, the next 3 classes, I'll be focusing on chapters 1 and 2, and then we'll get into this. We'll kind of take this introductory material and we'll get into Nehemiah and set the scene there in chapter 1, and immediately we're going to start seeing these characteristic traits of Nehemiah and why we want to look to him. Thank you so much for your participation. I appreciate it.